Do we have people?
Yes, the attendees are now here.
Why can't we see them? Oh, sorry. Oh, yes, they're there. You're gonna let them in shortly.
It's great to see everyone here. I think they can all see us, but we can only see their names. Hello, everyone.
It's nice to see some of the artists from the program joining this evening. Hi, Terry. Great.
Good day, everyone. Welcome to the panel discussion on creative resistance within the Filipino diaspora. This event is part of the celebration of the Filipino American History Month this October. My name is Andrea Cristina Caimo, Vice Consul and Economic Officer of the Philippine Consulate General in Honolulu. We are proud to partner with Hawaii Contemporary in bringing this conversation on the role of Filipino diaspora artists in introducing visual strategies in seeking to question ideas around societal and cultural perceptions of Philippine culture. We will be hearing the perspectives of contemporary artists Paul Pfeiffer, James Clar, and Ara Laylo. Sara Raza, Associate Director of the Hawaii Contemporary, would be moderating this session. I would now turn the floor to Catherine Don, the Acting Executive Director of the Hawaii Contemporary.
And thank you, Andrea. And thank you to the Philippine Consulate General in Honolulu for partnering with us on this opportunity to celebrate contemporary art with meaningful dialogue. We at Hawaii Contemporary are honored to have such collaborative partners and are grateful to our sponsors to helping us realize their work. Thank you to the Taiji and Naoko Family Foundation for their support of our public programs this fall and for their unwavering commitment to enriching our local arts ecosystem in Hawaii. Following today's program, we at Hawaii Contemporary hope to continue a virtual lineup to further engage our community connected by the Pacific Ocean, specifically Asia Pacific and Oceania regions, through conversations that further a dialogue beyond Euro-American centric ways of thinking. And I'm delighted now to introduce my colleague, Sara Raza, who works between New York and Honolulu and is an incredible champion for our mission to connect Hawaii and the Pacific through contemporary art. As a global contemporary art curator, Sara is an art specialist of Western and Central Asian regions and their international diaspora. Her experience complements our efforts to champion Indigenous creative voices and diversity on a larger scale beyond our shores in Hawaii, and especially during a critical global moment. A huge mahalo to our speakers for preparing a very lively and visual discussion. James Clar, Paul Pfeiffer, and Ara Laylo, both of whom were former Honolulu Biennial participants. Thank you to Nicole and the consulate team for preparing tonight's program, and our Facebook Live audience and everyone who helped get the word out. And now to you, Sarah, to provide a further introduction and start the conversation.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Thank you so much to all of you. Good evening from New York, and good morning to our colleagues joining us from Manila, and good afternoon to all our friends in Hawaii. So lively discussion across 3 different time zones. So I'm very happy to be here tonight. As Kat mentioned, we are very happy to welcome back 2 of our alumni from previous 2019 Honolulu Biennial, Paul Pfeiffer and Ara Laylo. So a special welcome back to you both, and a hello and welcome to James Clar as well. Again, we'd like to thank our partner, the Philippine Consulate in Hawaii, and also to the Taiji and Naoko Terasaki Family Foundation. We wouldn't be able to do this without you. So today's discussion is really going to be a lively one, where we are speaking about the concept of creative resistance through artistic practice in the works of 3 extremely diverse artists who are all part of the Filipino diaspora. So their experience really exists as let's say, a critical corridor between ideas and art, between geographies, between mental space and physical space. So the conversation is very much geared towards that. And without further ado, I'd like to firstly give a little bit more of an introduction to our speakers this evening. So starting with Paul Pfeiffer, welcome. He is an artist who is currently living and working in New York. He was raised between Hawaii and the Philippines and studied at the San Francisco Art Institute, and then later at the Hunter College in New York, as well as attending the professional Whitney Independent Study Program. He works predominantly in video, sculpture, and photography, and explores the limits of popular mass entertainment, particularly the manipulation of images and that provoke ideas around consciousness. And he's worked with a lot of reworking of images that already exist through the internet, such as YouTube, as well as television, and as well as developing his own footage to create this sort of hybrid ideas into what constitutes as real, and sort of reworking the ideas around the practices of everyday life. James Clar, welcome, also based in New York, is an artist who is working with the medium of light and technology, and is a graduate of NYU's Interactive Telecommunications Program, where he also teaches. And his practice really focuses on the manipulation, again, also of technology, and the perception of what constitutes as reality, and particularly the manipulation of information systems and how they affect our practices also in terms of daily life. He has worked considerably in different cultural topographies in Dubai, in Japan, as well as in his family's native Philippines, where he's due to shortly relocate to set up an artist active studio. Ara Laylo, last but not least, was born in the Philippines and now works in Honolulu. She's our only polymath this evening, who is working across diverse disciplines, fine arts, design, as well as topography. And she also lectures and teaches at the University of Hawaii in Manoa. And her work is mainly also following a hybrid model using ideas around cut and mix culture, video, live impromptu installations, sometimes performative gestures where she uses her own body to enact social and anthropological issues that deal with subjects such as migration and guest workers. And her current interests have really been about the dissemination of power and how that is played out in society. And that is something sort of just to give you a sort of sense of the diversity of tonight's panelists. But I'd like to sort of start by giving us a very small overview of the contemporary art scene in the Philippines. And just to sort of give you an idea that these artists, although our conversation isn't geared towards one that is focused on nation building or focused on geographically specific rubrics in art and ideas, but it's one that sort of is fluid. It sort of moves between, in a sense that it migrates between art and ideas. So that's really important to sort of say that from the outset. But I'd like to just sort of say that there's a very vibrant scene headquartered in Manila, which is mainly supported by the National Commission of Culture and the Arts, and is sort of centered around the Cultural Center of the Philippines, which is really the main hub for contemporary art activity. But in general, there are also a number of private museums that have emerged over the last decade, such as Isla Museum and Lopez Museum as well, and also the Vargas Museum. Another sort of very vibrant space is the Bellis Art Project, which hosts a number of residencies for international artists, furthering the dialogue between Filipino artists as well as their peers internationally. And that is also a very important sort of space to think about, as well as a commercial bargaining hub of galleries and artist-run spaces that have started to emerge in the recent years as well. But what is really interesting is the sort of activity that is sort of expanding out of the universities, and particularly spills into the two university art museums. One is the University de la Salle Museum of Contemporary Art and Design, as well as the Manila University's Ateneo Art Gallery, which are both known for their very interesting exhibitions of recent graduates, as well as students, as well as guest curated shows. And these are sort of very interesting in sort of thinking about the dialogue between the next generation of practitioners who are sort of affiliated with ideas that are very much rooted in post-colonial discourse, that are very much rooted in ideation. So narratives that are sort of exploring the idea of third space, which is one that exists as a very complex set of ideologies, one where artists find themselves amongst several corridors where they're able to both linguistically, culturally, and through different media move through these spaces. And that's something very interesting for our speakers, especially James Clar, who is one of the artist professors here. And what is also, thank you so much, I mentioned, thank you, Paul just sent me a note on the chat. And speaking of chat, I'd just like to remind you all, please kindly send me your questions in the chat so that at the end of our discussion, I can field those and answer them for you. But if you kindly keep yourself on mute during the meantime, I'd be grateful. Thank you. So just to sort of come back to our discussion, as I was mentioning, the sort of relationship between the university, between educational pedagogy in the arts, the role of artists, and sort of creating this vibrant studio that sort of moves away from the plastic arts that were very much sort of prevalent during the modern period, as we go towards the contemporary, thinking about the more conceptual ideation that is occurring, one that is not necessarily rooted in nation building, but one that is more fluid and is about a sort of artistic narrative. And that's something I wanted to sort of move to James, who has sort of created this practice that is rooted in technology. So it's a very interesting third space, if you like. We're so used to thinking east-west that we forget that there's another whole third space going on, which is technology, which is the digital, which is this realm, which is a fascinating sort of interplay and zone between the two, as we sort of redefine our topographies, if you like. So with the work of James, I wanted to sort of point out, could we kindly have some images also from my colleague of his practice? Just over to you, James. I just wanted to ask you about your work as a sort of critical juncture that exists between the Philippines and the United States, and how you're sort of moving between diverse spaces to not only create work, but also your future intention, which is to establish a studio.
Right, that's right. So the idea is now I'm shifting my studio from New York and then going to be Manila and Tokyo based. The idea is to kind of get integrated into the art scene there and kind of continue a dialogue with the artists there, and to kind of understand more about the cultural systems that are there, and more about like kind of my cultural identity also. I grew up in the States, so for me, this is kind of a process of exploration and process of discovery. So in the last couple of years, I've been doing more and more work in the Philippines and just trying to understand the space, the materials, and the different systems that I can use to kind of create artworks. My background was film and animation. So this piece that we're seeing is, it's a laser scanner and it's placed outside during the monsoon season. And what it is, it's taking the kind of the three-dimensional noise system, the meteorological system of rain during the monsoon. And as that rain passes through this two-dimensional plane of the laser, it creates kind of like a static noise. So I'm kind of using environmental data to an animation system. And this is kind of recalling back to animation, my background as an animator. But so I'm, the environment there is like, it's rainy from like May to November. So this is something kind of unique to that area. This is called Nobody's Home. So I found this, it's kind of like local producer, woodworker, and he created a door. And into the door, I integrated this LED system. And the LED system then is playing video of myself and my studio assistant walking back and forth. But it's just integrated into the bottom of the door, so you see the sliver of light. And from that sliver of light, then you have a perception of a different space and people behind there. But it's not, it's not physically there. But, this is kind of also back to my, my background in film. When you watch film, it doesn't actually exist. It's just light kind of bouncing off a screen. But from that light bouncing off a screen, then you have a perception of characters in the storyline. You have like an emotional reaction. So I'm trying to reduce like the information of a person into just a sliver of light. What's interesting to me is also like when I show this, like I've created this piece in different spaces, and I've shown it here in New York, and then I've shown it in Manila, and like kind of depending on where I show it, people have different perceptions of what's going on. In the Philippines, it's like they really see it as more like ghosts and this kind of spiritual space. And so I think it's kind of dependent on like the culture that views the piece. The piece says a lot about kind of subjectivity because the way we see things or interpret spaces or light depends on the cultural structures given to us. So, reality is this kind of cultural construction with kind of inherent biases.
May I ask a question, James, about this? But these practitioners, like this carpenter that you're working with, they also get to experience the work when it's finished. Have you shown them what you're doing?
Unfortunately, no. We had to drive around. We're driving around different kind of fabrication. There's like there's different woodworking areas in Manila. So I had driven around for a few days just trying to find a door that had this kind of nice aesthetic to it.
But with your intention to build the future studio in Manila, you mentioned several times that you want to be able to integrate the wider community, particularly the team of practitioners that sort of help produce the work, the makers, the local scene, to sort of really create this robust dialogue.
Yeah, this is true. This is absolutely true. And I think like once I'm there, based there, then, the hope is that the studio becomes kind of like this hub where people can come and hang out and kind of talk about different artistic ideas.
Absolutely. So you sort of see it as the extension of your practice as an artist to be able to include these vital conversations, because it's very interesting that these dialogues actually happen in the artist studio and that you're able to sort of share with your peers as well.
Right. I mean, when you have the studio set up, and it's similar to the studio I had set up in Dubai, where it becomes this kind of like place to hang out for artists or just kind of people who are curious. You see works in progress, and they're kind of like catalysts for conversations. You start talking about like who you are, why you're there, who they are, and you start having these, dialogues about identity.
Yes, it's very interesting because it seems to be that we've had this discussion with the group, and we want to just say that, I often thought that we were beyond identity politics, but given the current rhetoric that we're sort of seeing around the world, instigated by the United States, they say, I was saying today to a colleague of mine that when America sneezes, the whole world catches a cold. So we sort of see similar ideas, domino effects going on, what's happening in the world and how that's sort of affecting artists. But of course, again, artists are nowhere near politicians, and we're not here to correct the wrongs of the world in any shape or form. It's more or less an idea about provocation and thinking about new ways, new ideas to speak about our current realities without necessarily grounding them in any fixed statements.
Right, it's really observation. You observe something, and then you make a statement about it, and it can't be refuted because it is reality, but then you try to trigger conversation around it.
Absolutely, and the conversation piece is sort of really key here. And James, could we kindly see some more works?
Yep. So, as I'm roaming around, I'm spending time in Manila. I'm just kind of roaming around, just trying to find different materials, things that kind of trigger off like different works. I go into these junkyards and I'm starting to pick up kind of industrial materials. And it's nice because it's, you just talk to people and you start to pick up materials, and people are very friendly and they're happy to help out, even though they don't understand what the end piece is supposed to be, or sometimes I don't understand what the end piece is supposed to be. It's just nice to have these kind of conversations. So we went to a junkyard, I picked up this door, and then the piece also just kind of reminded me of, I grew up in Wisconsin, so we're spending a lot of time in the car, and this is called Taking a Ride with My Best Friend. It's like you're sitting in a car, your friend is driving, you're staring out the window, and you're just kind of daydreaming. So it's a bit of a narrative work. It's like you're looking at the window, daydreaming, but you're visualizing thought. And it's like a hovering set of evolving symbols that float over the window. So it's a car door with a laser scanner, and then just kind of evolving symbols.
So interesting here. And again, this is sort of layering of different technological pieces here.
Right. So this is filmed last February also. There's sound to this.
Unfortunately, we could try some sound, but I must apologize that on Zoom, the sound is not a strong one. So perhaps you could kindly point, is this work on your website so audiences can see that?
I'll put it, I haven't put it live. I'll put it live now, but
yes, please, if you could kindly do that so that they can experience the sound. And but could you please speak to this work, because this is also shot in Manila, yes?
Yeah, so it's shot in Manila. I took 2 karaoke machines, and then we put them in this tricycle, and we started driving them around Manila and amplifying the sound of the concrete. And then it's kind of triggering off these sound interactive lights from the karaoke machines. So, the Philippines is like really karaoke centric. It's kind of ingrained in the culture there, but also it's kind of like talking about like the physical space, converting the physical space into sound. How do we look at the environment around us? How do we make sense of it? And it's kind of this conversation piece with these 2 karaoke machines, driving along the city and then having a conversation where the city is actually conversing.
It's a really interesting sort of idea around the aural dimension and sort of thinking through the ear and the sort of idea of the soundtrack of the city, if you like.
Right.
And do you go through various different neighborhoods, or did you?
Well, we had to get like permits. So we had the barangay is like the kind of local manager of a certain like set of blocks. So we have to kind of give him some money so that him and his friends kind of close down blocks of the street so that we can drive we had like 2 vans and then the tricycle. So it's like a film crew of like 12 people.
Oh, wow.
And then we drove through from like afternoon into nighttime. So we just get kind of the change of the day. So the conversation kind of takes, so the conversation takes on throughout the whole night.
It's fascinating. So that sort of created this really interesting. And when you show this, obviously you have large speakers to amplify the sound.
It's just it's like noise of like the concrete, the microphones banging on the concrete. But all the content has been recorded. I haven't exhibited it because it was, it's been the pandemic, but the content was there. I wasn't sure if it was going to exhibit it as like a multi-channel installation, or right now I just edit it as a single channel, like short edit.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, James.
And then
also this work.
Yeah, so this is a piece that I started in Dubai. It's called A Moment Defined by a Point in a Line. And what I was doing was taking these kind of historical assassinations, these kind of critical moments in time, and then reducing it down to the point of entry, the bullet, and the angle of trajectory. So this is kind of showing the assassination of Nino Aquino. And it's you can see on the left is kind of the research that was done based on this assassination. So the bullet entered kind of the back near the ear and then came out the jaw. And then you can see on the sculptural piece over there, the light, it's done at his same height. And then the light piece is kind of where the bullet entered in the angle of trajectory. So it's kind of a historical moment that I was thinking about, like kind of culture and these historical moments that kind of shift the course of a society. So, this particular incidents kind of like unified the opposition to the Marcos regime. It kind of led to the People Power Revolution, and then also like the effects are still felt today in the society there. So, how do you define this turning point by like just a 3D point in space? the point of entry, the bullet, and the line, like an angular trajectory. So it's like history reduced to just minimal geometry.
It's really fascinating because when we think about geometry, you know, it manifests in three spaces. You know, it manifests in the body, the relationship between the body, through sound, and through architecture. And you created a work that incorporates all three of these sort of elements, because there is a sound piece to this as well, isn't there? There's some sound.
No. This is just
one. Oh, sorry, excuse me.
No, this is just sculptural. Yeah.
Yes, but if you insert the sound piece, you sort of look at all the different elements of how geometry manifests itself in space. It's really interesting. Obviously, I often think about geometry in terms of its association with physical space as well. So it's very fascinating. He has a very interesting forensic work.
Yeah, it's really very reductionist. I mean, just like how much can you reduce this critical moment, you know, a historical moment, just to like a point in a line, you know? Yes,
it's a very mathematical idea. And that's a really interesting sort of juncture for us to turn to Paul for discussion now to open up. But thank you so much. Yeah. So we'll be coming back and forth shortly, and to speak a little bit about your work in particular. Although you don't really operate like a forensic scientist, there are elements within your work where you sort of instigate manipulation. Your interest within the role of mass media, particularly internet, news, real, so forth, has been sort of central to your practice. And within your works in particular, although there's always this idea of this additional protagonist, this other I, this is how I interpret your work anyhow. And that's something that's always been fascinating to me, because there's a presence there and it's also an absence. And you often have said that your work is interested in this sort of idea of absences, or which you referred to earlier as ghosts in our conversation.
Yeah. I was thinking about ghosts as evidence of something that maybe has happened in the past, that's not immediately apparent, but indicates something that maybe has been covered up or repressed, a memory that, you know, for whatever reason, wants to be forgotten. And in this case, just thinking about it in relation to editing, I guess the ghost that you're seeing relates to that editing work that I did on the image. It started out as the historical image of the thriller in Manila. And I, using animation techniques, sort of erased the boxers from the ring. So it's the original footage, just with the boxers removed. And the kind of the waves that you see are the sort of the areas where the boxes were removed or absented. And you're literally seeing, that's, I guess, where the handwork is being done.
Yes.
Also just thinking about like image in general, as possibly functioning like a matrix, in the sense of one image that could mean many different things, or that could trigger many different perspectives. I forget where I got it from, but I encountered the idea that the best image is like the one image that says as many different things as possible. And although that's kind of an enigmatic thing to say, I like it as a kind of working idea of how to think about working with historic images or historic footage, or just with images in general as an artist.
May I ask you, Paul, you know, obviously you're dealing with a lot of archival material, and then you source that from various means. So you've used YouTube, you've used actually footage from newsreel and different newspapers and different other sources. And in terms of this sort of manipulative technique where you're sort of stitching it together, there's a sort of absence and presence going on. You see it here also within this second work. We can see it, we can carry on speaking as well, whilst my colleague is placing the work on the screen. So we sort of see this interplay, that there's something missing, there's a very poetic sort of element here. So you're raising a lot of questions without necessarily answering them intentionally, which is very clear. There's also the idea of spectacle, or our society of spectacle, you know, and how how it sort of thrives upon this, and the whole idea of TV and obviously entertainment and how reality sort of blurs within that. But let me ask you, what is the fascination with the boxers? It's something I always wanted to ask you.
I guess I think about it in relation to the history of the figure in art, specifically in painting and sculpture. You know, in a sense, the figure has been a consistent line throughout image making history. And well, actually, these two images maybe illustrates a kind of fascination of mine, which is that, especially in recent years, the nature of video technology is changing so fast that one of the things that you can capture in the boxing ring, where athletes are almost close to naked, is something like the pure human figure subjected to the camera in more and more intense forms. The resolution gets higher and higher, the frame rate gets higher and higher, so that especially in the past few years in the boxing ring, what's being produced are intense, lush images of violence on the most intimate level exacted on the body. And I guess in a case like this, removing the other boxer, and to me, like, intensifies the spectacle of the impact on the body.
Absolutely.
By taking away the sort of the narrative rationale for what's happening.
Absolutely, there's that sort of beautification of violence here, which I completely understand what you're showing, but there's also a lot of ideas around masculinities within your work as well, and sort of how you mix that with pop culture. And that's something, perhaps you want to say something about that, if relevant?
Shoot, masculinity.
Well, there's a lot of
well,
ideas
yeah,
about
no,
masculinity
absolutely. I mean, in some ways, I think, you know, we certainly are living in a time when, well, at least like half the population in the US is very attracted to this notion of an alpha male as our leader. So much so that they will reject science, reject all kinds of like rationalist ideas just for the kind of emotional satisfaction of identifying with a strong man.
It's more like the cult of personality, wouldn't you say?
You mean the cultural personality of
or the cult of personality, this sort of figure.
The cult of personality, yeah. But I've heard, it's just, I thought of it because I heard a couple of news reports just in the last couple of days where they're interviewing people to find out if who they're going to vote for in the next few days. And those that are voting for Trump, really, they say over and over what they like is that he's an alpha male. And people feel like what they need is the alpha male. To me, this speaks of the degree to which a certain kind of like male identity is under threat. So
Absolutely.
much so that it needs to reinforce itself through kind of the most brutal examples of what it means to be a man or what it means to be a leader. So I guess, you know, to me, the image of a guy who seems to be fighting himself speaks to a kind of like pathology, or maybe a kind of, yeah, just, you know, like a kind of like a mental trauma for which there's a real question. What is the origin of this trauma?
Exactly.
And maybe that's one of the questions I seek to ask in an image like this.
Most definitely. It's definitely evident.
Who is the enemy in the end?
I like your use of smuggling and coding within these works. It's very interesting for me as a sort of conceptual tool as well, and how you've sort of utilized that. Could we, speaking of this idea of cultural personality and sort of populist imagery, there is another very interesting example of your work, if we could kindly show installation-based, because you're more predominantly known for your video installations, and this is a really interesting departure. As we all know, this is Justin Bieber, cult figure in his own right.
Sorry, Sara, I threw this in at the last minute.
Yes, you were very last minute. We were just saying that, but we're grateful to have the diversity here. So kindly let us know what was the impetus behind this work.
Yeah. Can we scroll through the images?
Yes, please.
While we talk? I mean, this is just oh, nope. Yeah, if you could go back. Is there a way to see them one after another?
All of your images? Sorry.
There's these are 3 different images ganged together. If it's possible to see them one.
Let's see if we can do that. Let's see
if not, it's okay.
Okay. As a, if we could compromise, if we can't do that.
No, don't worry about it, Nicole. Just show it as is. This is a project that I worked on, what is it now, 2 years ago, actually at Bellas Artes, which you mentioned.
Yes.
Oh, and before I forget, I just want to mention, just because I'm actually a board member of the Museum of Contemporary Art and Design.
You are.
So I have to give a shout out to MCAD at La Salle.
Thank you. It's great. They're doing wonderful work, and
yes.
Thanks to you to continue that work as the board, because that's a very important role.
I'm super happy to be part of that board. So yeah, this was made following an invitation from Bellas Artes to make use of wood carvers that are part of their team of craftspeople, and it occurred to me when I was thinking about this invitation that really the history of wood carving in the Philippines is related to the production of religious icons. Mm-hmm. And perhaps the most iconic of the religious images in the Philippines is the Santo Niño. Because the legend is that it came with Magellan. And so it just got me thinking, I was heading to the Philippines in 2017, and it so happened that Justin Bieber was about to give a concert in Manila.
Oh.
Of all places, he was going to give a concert at Philippine Arena, which is the new kind of mega stadium built by the Iglesia Ni Cristo. So it's really a mega church. So here you have Justin Bieber about to give a concert in the biggest mega church in the Philippines in 2017, and then just before a month or maybe even just a couple of weeks before he was supposed to give that concert, he canceled his tour, or what was left of it, because and then reemerged at the beginning of 2018 as a born-again Christian, and then went on to become really one of the first openly evangelical pop stars in the world. So in short, I decided to make a project of engaging wood carvers in the Philippines who are used to who primarily make religious images, to fashion a crucified Christ out of Justin Bieber.
And he's been dismembered, I can see from the images.
The way that religious wood carving is done, it would be done, the limbs would be done separately, and then they would be slotted together. Mm-hmm. So if you see the arm joint in the detail on the left at the bottom, there's a kind of a wooden pieces where you would slot on the arms.
I see. So these were polychrome figures historically, weren't they? The saints and so forth.
They were, and the title of this piece is Incarnator. Incarnator is a kind of Anglican, an English version of the word encarnador, which would be the particular artisan who does the last part of the process, which is to put flesh on the wood.
And the Spaniards brought this to the Philippines through the process of colonialism, or was it?
I mean, it's a 400-year-old tradition, and there are particular provinces, Pampanga and Laguna, specifically the town of Paite, that are known for hundreds of years as centers of religious icon production. The particular guy who made this piece, Justin Bieber, as a crucifix, his name is Willie Layog, and he's really the top santo maker in the Philippines. He actually trained with artisans in Spain, and continues to operate a studio in Pampanga. Yeah.
It's interesting. So the whole thread of the cult of personality is sort of very much evident here. And unfortunately, we couldn't show the video that you wanted to showcase this evening because the sound is a very key component.
Yeah.
Where can audiences see that sort of accompanied this work?
Well, that video that I was going to show was commissioned by Freeze, and so it might appear on Freeze's website.
Freeze Art Fair.
Yeah.
So okay, if those who are
part
interested,
of an annual commission that they do where they
absolutely,
invite.
I know it.
Cool.
So Freeze Art Fair, those of you who are interested in seeing the video, Freeze Art Fair, if you Google Paul Pfeiffer's name, might still have it in their archive. It was last year, Paul?
Last year or 2 years ago, I can't remember now. But just very recently. Yeah.
Yeah, they should have it.
I will say also, like, you know, I love the idea of how, without really doing anything, obviously I didn't do anything. I just commissioned the woodcarver to make this image. But in a sense, like everything about his training and the tradition he comes from carries the texture of history.
Of course.
And so, you know, everything about this, in a sense, embedded in the material is that history, just combined with this kind of contemporary figure.
It's very interesting because it's the modern day idolatry, if you like, you know, the modern day worship of the idol, which are the current day saints. So it's a very interesting sort of play on our current condition of, you know, obviously exaggerating the role of these pop icons, these pop figures, whether they are, you know, cult recreational figures, if you like, and sort of exaggerating that metaphor.
I like the idea of a kind of, I forget what the word is, but like, well, you know, something that would be thought of as being particularly contemporary and only contemporary, actually being related to, you know, a phenomenon that's centuries old.
Yeah, for sure. You know, ideas don't fall out the sky. So obviously it has clearly evolved from sort of a indigenous or ancient practice, but it takes on new meaning within our current sort of climate. So it's really interesting to see that. And, you know, I just want to thank you because I also want to give a chance for Ara to showcase her work before we open it up and have a dialogue between us all. So Ara, thank you so much. But thank you so much, Paul, firstly. And thank you, Ara, for joining us. Last but not least, I know I called you a polymath earlier because you seem to be doing so many different things that are sort of rooted at the different juncture between art, between design, between, you know, teaching, and also your work with, as a creative developer as well as a creative director with television as well and new media production. So I wanted to speak a little bit about your today, not so much about your sort of multi-hyphenated role, but your role as an artist, because this is a new area that you're starting to explore. And as we've discussed before, you found a lot of freedom in sort of exploring social issues through visual art that sort of gave you the avenue to explore more conceptual ideas. So perhaps we could talk about this particular work that we see on the screen here.
Well, these are memories, and it's interesting that James brought up the karaoke machine. That is an image that's so connected to Filipino culture, the gathering of family and friend around a karaoke machine. And we'll echo that in our last piece that we show. But my main work really is, you know, I'm a creative director for NMG Network. And, you know, I think the word that we used in the past is, you know, that I'm an interlocutor of, you know, like we're constantly in this dialogue of defining what luxury is in the tourism industry here in Hawaii. And I'm not sure which piece you want to talk about first. I'm getting a little bit confused.
No worry. I wanted to, obviously, we all know you as a multi-hyphenate. As I said, you've done a lot of creative work, but I wanted to just sort of focus on your recent performative work in which you use your own body as well. And then, because I just want to point out the images that we see on the screen some of them are from your social media, which for you is an alternative visual cultural medium, I would say. Anybody who follows Ara's, and I encourage you all to follow her Instagram account, sort of sees it as a creative outlet. And for me, it's really interesting how you sort of use it as an extension of a medium. And
I mean, for me, using social media is, you know, as you know, I was having conversations with Paul this weekend, but like this is my way of flirting with the systems of power by, you know, if anything, confusing the algorithms of what they think I am or what I think I am. And so I often mix in all the things that excite me and ignite me and confuse me, and the social media is the arena to communicate to the masses. And you know, I'm quite grateful to be able to work in media, and you know, our work at NMG has evolved from creating like these beautiful print material to producing agency and creative work that is over the top content video. So video is always it's hard to ignore. Obviously, everything that we see is on the screen right now, especially within our COVID season. And it reminds everybody the power of the rhetoric, the power of design is very obvious in my work. The way I see it, everything is a sign. Every color, every music that you listen to, every film, we create this language, this library of meaning, and we create this bubble in our minds. And so I bombard you, the audience, and I bombard myself with as much visual language as possible. It's almost it's literally the same strategy that you know, right-wing media do. It's the same similar type of rhetoric. If that answers.
Absolutely. And it's sort of bringing some sort of algorithmic justice, if you like, to the situation. You know?
I would love to confuse. I would love to confuse the algorithm, but you know, it's
absolutely.
always.
I mean, it's a main concern. It's really important that you sort of point that out, that there is an algorithmic injustice going on. And that is very much rooted in right-wing politics. And we sort of see that on social media. We see certain content that is intentionally suppressed and so forth. And, you know, it's not just, you know, if you think about the white men who are sort of producing these algorithms, it's not by accident that this is actually occurring. So I really like the way that you act as a disruptor, not just an interlocutor, but a disruptor of this, which is really, Weapons of Mass Destruction. Somebody wrote that, which is a great book. And also, speaking of books, I just quickly take the stage with this Algorithms of Oppression, which is a great book too. And very much interesting.
That would be a great, you know, when I die, I hope that's something that somebody says to me. She was a weapon of mass destruction, you know.
Yes, but the book is called, there's a book by Kathy O'Neill, and she's a mathematician. It's called Weapons of Math Destruction, as in mathematics. It's really interesting. It all deals with algorithms and all of this. So it's very interesting sort of idea around, and it comes back to the mathematics again. There's a, you know, a very much focus on sort of logic and illogic in order to think about perceptions of reality as well, which I find really interesting. If we come back to this idea about creative resistance, is that, you know, there is this disruption going on of what constitutes as logic or what constitutes as reality within all three of your works. But before we sort of conclude and have a further dialogue, I want to give an opportunity, Ara, for you to just speak about your works as a performance artist, which you've recently started. I know you don't like to call yourself that, but you know, you took on quite hefty sort of social themes. And earlier on, we were looking at a map that you had produced in which you showed the sort of movement and migration of guest workers of Filipino origin, where they've sort of migrated to, and it showed obviously the Middle East.
I didn't make that map.
So you use it as a research point.
I use it as a research point, and like to point out the amount of overseas Filipino workers, the millions of Filipinos that are out there, and also stranded during COVID. you know, my mother worked in the hotels when I was younger, and so this piece that was, this installation that was done at Surf Jack was very much inspired by the work that my mother did. And you know, like Hawaii is a is a tourist industry, and so for me, again, I've put myself in the art piece itself, and worked a short shift at the Surf Jack Hotel, and then you can see, as Nicole will go to the next images, I created an environment for the hotel workers also to celebrate them and honor the work that they do, honor the work that my mother has done, you know. And I brought in like pancit and drinks, and hired these ladies to celebrate with karaoke, going back to the whole celebration aspect of rejoicing in their work, right? And rejoicing with them in the very hotel rooms that they clean, that they're not even allowed to use, really. So for me, in my opinion, my very existence is resistance. My very existence as an artist is rebellion, and oftentimes, like, I have to remind myself that, and oftentimes the patriarch whispers in my ear and tells me of how invalid I am, or how less vetted I am, or how less pedigreed I am. But here I am in Hawaii, defining what luxury looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's
here we are. And so that to me is a wonderful place to have conversation with, especially young people.
Absolutely. And also, these are, if we think about the idea of guest workers, you know, they're in a very precarious role as it is, because they can be asked to leave at any moment. But these are all, we sort of cannot forget that these are all the remnants of colonialism. You know, it's not by accident that this has happened. It's not by accident, you know, that people have not just found themselves somewhere. Yes. And let's not forget that Hawaii is also a colonial sort of space.
This is stolen land. This
exactly.
is stolen land.
It is absolutely stolen land, and it's, you know, it belongs to the indigenous people. It's very clear. Okay. I often say it's not an open air prison. It's not like Palestine. You know, it's not that kind of condition, but it's still an occupied space. It's not a violently occupied space right now, but historically, of course, it was, you know. And so that is really important. I say that this is why we champion alternative voices, diverse voices. Indigenous.
It's really and not to put down the hotel industry. The conversation is problematic in that, like, if we're talking about remittance and the amount of money that that migrant workers and Filipino workers, even in Hawaii, especially Hawaii alone, if we could quantify the amount of money that we are sending back to our families, like the majority of my family is still in the Philippines, and we provide for the majority of our family, my mother's side and my father's side. And that's probably the same pattern that most Filipino Americans will say about their family.
Exactly. And most migrant workers obviously remittance send money back home, which is what remittance is, you know. So this idea of working and then sending back and supporting other economies, which is a part of another cycle of discussion as well. But this is a very important one to have, because here we sort of look at different layers of discussion. And on that note, I want to open it up to our colleagues and our guests who are joining us today. Let me quickly go through the chat just to make sure that there aren't any questions. And I urge you all that are listening to speak a little bit, to join our conversation. But it's interesting because I did have a question from one of my students, actually, when I told her that we were going to do this, for one of my students at the SBA this evening, about when we were going to do this sort of discussion. They were very interested in sort of, obviously, people from the Philippines were also migrants to Hawaii. You know, the connection here, obviously with the exception of James, both yourself and Paul were also migrants, but it wasn't, and it's not just one, it's a very different migration to what happened with the Europeans. Of course, it wasn't a colonial migration. But they were asking, but isn't this also a part? And I said, yes, to some degree, it is. There is a discussion, I believe, about the various different groups from Asia, but it's much more about a wider dialogue. Ara, I wanted to sort of ask you a little bit about this, because obviously, as somebody from the Philippines who was born there, you grew up there, and then you came here, this sort of layering of culture, layering of experience. How have you found that working in Hawaii?
I could tell you exactly which plantations my family came from. From my mother's side, the plantation was owned by the Yulo family. On my father's side, it was owned by the Villa Escuderos, right? And so, having an understanding of that and coming here, I mean, I think this piece, Dahil Sayo, is my interpretation of the modern plantation found in Waikiki, that again is dominated by a predominantly Filipino worker. And these workers, my goodness, they're supporting families and have been working in these beautiful hotels for like 20 to 30 years, right? And are committed to this place. It reminds me of how grateful I am to be able to exercise all of the privilege that I've been gifted as a first generation sympathetic settler to this place.
Yes, and the sympathetic piece is very sort of key. The idea of having empathy, and in order to sort of understand one's experience, which unfortunately is something we're witnessing right now, the very lack of it, or the polarization of what is empathy, apathy versus empathy.
Correct. Currently in Hawaii right now, there's Bill 80 that's being discussed, and groups like Local 5 are in support of making sure that our hotel workers are going back. And I mean, these are bodies in the front line, you guys, and that they're going back safely, and that people are getting their jobs back, right?
Absolutely. But in terms of, I want to just keep an eye on our chat though. Please, I ask our guests to utilize the chat to ask their questions. And give that, we have a message coming through. This is a very great comment from Sonia Zabala. Sharing with kindness, Hawaii is actually occupied by the US. The nation of Hawaii still exists. It was never annexed. Thank you for your comment.
Let's also remind everybody too that like the Philippines was liberated before it was purchased by the United States. That a group of Filipino delegates did go to the Paris Accord, I forget which 19 whatever have you, and did declare that the Philippines had been liberated. So how could it be purchased?
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. But there have been all these sort of historical sort of moments where part of my own research, which Kat had mentioned earlier on, which is why I very much enjoyed our discussion this evening, was to think about the sort of rise of the global South and the idea of decoupling away from West. And when I mean West, I mean Euro-American centric thinking, which is sort of really clear, and sort of movement away, because there is so much vibrancy and activity happening in Asia Pacific right now region, but also what is happening in the diaspora. Although they are no means connected, there is a connection there. There is sort of a trajectory that one can sort of trace, which is sort of very, very interesting. So when we think about, I don't mean to sound like, Gwyneth Paltrow when I say the word decoupling, I mean it in the term of consciously sort of, moving away, something that's no longer reliant upon the other. Often an argument I always made due to the mistreatment of migrant workers in parts of the Middle East, particularly the Gulf states, were that if migrant workers were to leave today, there would be nobody to look after your children, there would be nobody to serve you, nobody for food and beverage industry. Your economy and your life would shut down immediately. And similarly, these workers that you highlight within your work are also such another example of that if these people were to get up and go today, there would be nothing left. Who would fill these slots? is an important sort of point. Let's go back to the chat and see. Sharing with kindness. Okay, thank you, Sonia. You elaborate. Can the artist kindly speak about bridging conversations with everyday people, like our Nanyas or our Tates, and their artwork provoke and inspire? Paul, do you want to say something to that?
Yeah.
If it's acceptable.
Well, I mean, in some ways, I mean, I just think that this is a time of really like rising populist voices. So I don't know. In some ways, to me, the extent to which you know, like conservative leaders who purposefully adopt a kind of voice of the everyday and of the every person is something to be critical of. You know, it challenges notions of kind of the inherent connection between, say, democracy or populism and freedom, or say like egalitarian participation in society, because, you know, as we know, these populist voices are oftentimes now being used as a form of camouflage to hide an actual sort of predatory nature behind the populist facade. So I don't know. I guess well, yeah, the question of like speaking to our nanais and our tatais, I mean, for me, like starts maybe with an idea that relates to what you said, Sarah, about like a growing recognition of the actual nature of the global South as a very complex way of being in the world, an actual exchange between people that has been going on for forever, but which has been sort of marginalized in favor of kind of a narrative that you know, upholds the notion of what like culture being carried by the West, by the few,
Exactly,
and by capitalism. So yeah, I don't know. To me, like, I think we have so much to learn from our nanas and our tatais, and what that is, like how we do that is a matter of like, in a way, like appreciating a kind of complexity of language and of culture that has always existed, but in some ways we've been kind of led to, you know, towards kind of more simple understandings of culture, and the actual complexity has been like hidden from us or suppressed.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. Like what you're saying is totally correct. Like when the Bandung conference happened, which was in 1955, it was the first example of the interconnection between global South in the modern period. And that was when Asia and Africa were all ideating. Europe was not invited, neither was America, but Latin America was. But Europe was not invited to be part of that dialogue intentionally, because it was the first example of a decolonial dialogue that existed. And I urge you all to look at it. I'll put it up in the chat. Bandung Conference, which was a great example of this kind of exactly the kind of dialogue that we're trying to sort of achieve, that moves away from the Eurocentric. But I'd like to just say that unfortunately we've reached our limit this evening of time. So if there are any more questions, please feel free to email them to myself. I'll put my email in the chat. If you have, and I can pass them on kindly to the artists. But unfortunately, for this evening, we have to bid you farewell. But before I do that, I would like to thank again the Philippine Consulate, our generous sponsor, Taiji Noko Terasaki Family Foundation, as well as our generous education partners for other programs as well, the Hawaii Art Alliance and also the Bahana Society, who support our programs for artists, but also help support our work within the community. I'd just like to say thank you again, and thank you to our wonderful panelists. and wish you all a great afternoon, a great night, and a good morning again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Salamat po.